Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about getting productive with a new programming language. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what would you say is the fastest way to become productive in a new programming language? Well, I would say that before we go into how to get productive with the new programming language, something that I'd like to tell you, which I hope is going to be a silver lining for all the juniors out there who are feeling like, what the hell is a variable? How does a nested for loop work and things like that? The beautiful part about most programming languages now, not every single one of them, but most of them, is that they are very similar in the way that they construct things. Now, certain keywords might be different, and of course, the big hassle is always going to be, which is what we're going to talk about, learning the different libraries and all the different tools you need around the ecosystem that you find yourself and so forth. Because, as you can imagine, the programming language itself may not take all that long to figure out if you've already done it before. The first programming language will always be the hardest because you have never seen any of the syntax that we use in, it doesn't matter which one it is really, but once you have learned one of them, a lot of those concepts will transfer into other programming languages, which is kind of nice. But then you'll figure out the thing that the bitter seniors of us know, which is that that's the easy part, learning how to declare a variable or a loop or something like that. The tricky part is to know, okay, which method do I call on this specific library that I need, because otherwise it's not going to be, like, my favorite thing to bitch about is by far configurations. How do you configure your web server? How do you configure your pipeline? How do you configure, like, there's so much documentation, and like, it's not just pure code. It's not your own code. It's just something that somebody else has provided to you, and then you read tons of documentation and all that stuff. This is my favorite thing. Like, I wish ChatGPT was better at it, but it's one of my favorite things about ChatGPT, which is that due to that we have AI these days, it's usually faster to get because the thing that I usually tell people is that one of the most important things that you need to learn as a software developer is to find the answer to your own question. So when you're learning a new programming language or something like that, one of the first things that you're going to need is some pretty good Googling skills. And if you're really, really lucky, I feel sorry for the Scala developers out there, or maybe they're just better at searching for answers than I am. You find someone on the internet that has had a similar sort of problem, and their code, their example of what they did, might give you an idea of, okay, so how do I do my thing? Because that's the thing that usually blocks you in the beginning, because when you're completely fresh, everything is new. And when you've done it like myself, like you've done the syntax a few times, then you know what methods are already there. You know what types of constructs are going to be there. You more or less are, it's almost like a sixth sense. You sort of know what things are going to be in the programming language, what you're going to need a library for, and then when you know at least that, you know, some concepts they're so cross-cutting that every single programming language has them, and because you know that, you know how to search for them and like find it easier and so forth. And that's what AI does even better now than back in, no, it's still what I do today, right? When you search for something and then you might get a hook on something, and then you're, as I said, hopefully working with a language that is not Scala or something really complicated like that, where there's like no one, like there's not really a good knowledge base of examples to look at. Because that's the most important thing, I argue, when it comes to learning a new programming language. It is how easy is it for you to unblock yourself from trying things out. And that's the thing I want to talk to you about, because the syntax is, as I said, usually not the problem. Once you have learned how to do some basic stuff, I mean, it doesn't take more than maybe an hour or two to like learn the second programming language in terms of just being able to produce something, right? If you've already mastered one before and you're fairly experienced doing it. The thing that usually takes time is to figure out, how do you now work with this new programming language in the way that you're going to do on the job, with, you know, the conventions, what libraries are mainstream, what's like setups, how do you rig up like set up a new project and stuff like that. And so the thing that I usually try to do is that I try to divide and conquer or simplify my problem as much as possible and focus just on the stuff that is core to what I have to know. So for example, let's say that we're doing backend development. Now I know that every single backend project that I'm going to work with is going to have a package manager of some sort, because practically every software company and like every project has some type of dependencies of third-party libraries and stuff like that. It's going to include some type of REST API, or it doesn't have to be REST, but it's usually the case that it's some type of REST API. It's going to require some type of authentication mechanism or something like access control or something like that. It's going to have tests, and like I have to write tests for it, and there's probably going to be a database there, in there somewhere. These are usually the things, right? Now, with these 5 things that I know are common to practically every backend language, it doesn't matter which one you're dealing with, what I will do is that I will sit down and just learn those things in isolation. So, because one thing that it can be very difficult if you have, like, say, a new job, or you're starting on a new project where there's a programming language you're not so familiar with, is because the system is so big, it sort of takes away, or like it adds unnecessary complexity when you're trying to learn the basics of the language. And I still do this even to this day. It was the same thing I did when the only difference now is that when I was a junior and I had never done any of this stuff. So you can take my little list here to sort of just get a shortcut into the stuff that is usually the stuff you want to look at the most in the beginning when you're learning. Because when I was fresh, I didn't know, like, I didn't even know what a package manager was, right? I had no idea, right? And there's some build tools and stuff like that depending on what language you have, right? And those fundamentals, at least those 5, those are the basics that I usually look at. That's the stuff that I look at really in depth to begin with, because if I know those things, then I have, quote unquote now, basically the same understanding of the programming language as a junior software developer. Now, luckily, I'm a more experienced software developer, so even with just that knowledge, I already know all the theory, polymorphism, solid principles, like all the various things, and how to do all these things. So that's the thing that I can keep with me from every time I switch language. But this stuff, I always have to do this every single time, and luckily enough, it just gets quicker and quicker every time you do it. The tricky part after you've learned this, though, which is, I still find that a little bit tricky, which is to figure out what conventions are very, very expected to have, like basically a prerequisite for being able to do work in the same way as people do it within that community. Something that I truly think is like the wrong way of going is, those tech talks where it's like JavaScript and Node.js for Java developers or C# developers, and I kind of, every time I see one of those titles, I kind of go, so what's so fucking special about the Java developers that they can't just learn, React like everybody else? Why do they have to have a title, React for Java developers? And like, it's the same deal, right? And I have seen situations like that, which I try to avoid as much as possible, because I'm very much of the opinion that unless something is like really, really bad, or like I really know that I know a convention that is better than the one that is in the ecosystem, I try to align, just as we do in most situations, right? You try to align your way of writing code so that it fits within the sort of norms and guidelines of the language. The tricky part here is to know, when are you following a convention that is sort of just bread and butter for everybody? Like, for example, Java's really still, I can never get over it, the really weird way that you structure the source folder with, like, your domain name in like subsequent folders, like com dot whatever, Frederick dot something like so forth and so on. I still find it really weird. Just literally, I have to click 3-4 times more just to get to the main class file, for no reason, basically. But it is a convention that is so ingrained into the thing that is basically doctrine to do that. But on the other hand, if you go to say something like C# and you see that some people are using, the clean architecture, well, it's a convention if you're using the clean architecture, but it's not as ingrained in the language and the way of doing things as you might expect. So in other words, it might not be the case that I should learn as a beginner how to use that. I might want to use something simpler, and that's where it gets tricky, right? JavaScript is like the worst when it comes to figure out what tools are good bets and like who's telling you the truth and stuff like that. And in those sorts of situations, I usually try at the very least to either chat with some coworkers if I have some who like look at my own, like the projects that I work on and stuff like that, for sort of some reference material to sort of compare things. Another one that I really like, I actually had that the other day with a coworker of mine who was really into some stuff, and I said, well, look at these open source projects. Here are like the maintainers behind the various tools that we are using. They're doing stuff in that way, and you're claiming that your way is the way that everybody does it. But clearly, the people who are making the tool that you are using don't agree. So maybe your idea of what is like completely standard doctrine for how to work in this language is not as standard as you might think. So what I want you to take away from this is that the faster way that I find to become productive in a programming language is start out with just learning the syntax. There are like a million tools to like just learn the basics of the syntax, and that usually goes really quickly. Even if you're a beginner, it's going to be a little bit longer for you, but if you have more than one language behind you, you're going to find that it goes quicker and quicker. And after that, go down to basics and learn the stuff that is basically going to be the same. Like the way you do it is different because the tools are different, but the things you need to do are always the same. And first, as I've said, if I recall now, first and foremost, make sure that you know how to use a package manager for whatever language you have. Make sure that you know how to spin up like a little REST API or something like that. Make sure that you know how to like authenticate yourself and things of that nature. Make sure that you know how to write tests for your code and mocking and all this sort of stuff that is like every single programming language have libraries related to it. And then learn how to use a database if you're like a backend developer. I mean, the same thing is true for front end, so whether this is a little bit different. But these are the things that I try to suggest that you do, and try to do that a little bit in isolation, because I mean, if you're learning how to use the package manager, you don't have to have like a behemoth project. Like just create a silly little stupid like nothing project and start learning how to use it. I did that when I was learning Git, for example. When I was learning Git, guys, because it was not something that just it's a complicated tool, so I had to sit down and really try to learn it. I used like a markdown file with some text just to try out different commands and see how it worked. I had no like large scale projects or anything like that, and that's the best tip I can give you. Learn the things that are like super core to the language, these fundamentals, until you feel like you sort of understand how they work in a simple situation, and then try to make it more advanced as you go along. Have a great day.